Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of April of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. You know that currently one can say that there are a negotiation process between Ukraine, between Russia and Western countries. They try to discuss and they try to understand how the conflict in Ukraine is going to be finished and what is going to be next. Zelensky from his side are saying that he's planning to start another counteroffensive in 2025. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians will be completely defeated because during the first offensive, the Ukrainians lost around 166,000 people, and obviously during the next counteroffensive, the Ukrainians will lose more, and not just soldiers, but also significant number of square meters of the territory. And you know that was probably the reason why the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, arrived in Moscow. He had a meeting with Putin, and obviously Putin sent Lukashenko some messages. The messages is that Lukashenko should, let's say, send further to Western countries and Zelensky himself. And today we got some details about the speech and about the messages that were provided by Putin to Lukashenko. And the most important message is that according to Lukashenko, let's say, Zelensky's present terms ends in May, and 20 or 21st of May, those were the words of Lukashenko. And the situation could arise when there is no one to sign a peace treaty with. So this is a very important thing, because basically when talking about the current situation, the Ukraine has time until the, let's say, 20th, 21st of May. After that, if Ukraine decide to start negotiation process with Russia, and even if Ukraine decide to, let's say, surrender and to stop the special military operation, first they will have to start the president elections, and it will take another 6 months, and obviously nobody can tell us what is going to happen during these 6 months of, let's say, of president elections in Ukraine. Everything might happen, even the complete collapse of Ukraine and the disappearing of this country on the planet. Anything might happen, so that's why Putin sends Zelensky the final message that he waits until the 21st of May. If there is no, let's say, message, if there is no attempts to start negotiations, then probably the Russians will start the greatest counter-offensive operation with the purpose to restore the constitutional order on the territory of Ukraine by removing the Zelensky as, let's say, illegal president of Ukraine, or maybe something like this. Anyway, now it's time to start thinking for Zelensky. First of all, obviously the next few months, weeks, we're going to receive lots of updates, lots of, let's say, messages from the Western countries, when the Western politicals will ask and, let's say, begging Zelensky to start negotiation, but very likely Zelensky will refuse everything and he will continue, because first of all, it's not just a question about the Ukraine. First of all, it's the question of him. He's afraid of his personal life, obviously, and nobody will forgive him. I'm talking about Ukrainians, the situation that Ukraine appeared right now. And before we start the discussion, the situation on the ground, I would like to discuss with you this video. This is probably the best video of the previous 24 hours. On this video, we can see the first official case, the first, let's say, filmed or video case when a single Ukrainian managed to cross the border with Romania and to escape Ukraine and to leave mobilization, and basically who managed to save his own life. On this video, we can see a poor Ukrainian who was trying to cross the river. As you can see, the river wasn't so deep. It wasn't deep at all, but the river at some point was very fast. And when he reached the middle part of the river where the river was, let's say, has the maximum strength, river took him and moved him further along the river as far as possible. So there was a very high chances that he, let's say, could lost his life in the area. But the Ukrainian managed to survive. He managed to reach the opposite bank of the river, the Romanian bank of the river, and basically to save his life. Once again, this is the first case of successful, let's say, filmed case of successful crossing the border. Obviously, during the next few weeks, months, there were going to be hundreds, maybe thousands of Ukrainians who would try to do the same using the same road. and this is not the final video from the area, so we'll see what is going to be next. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. First, let's talk about Odessa. During the previous few days, the Russians were bombing Odessa heavily, and there was a train on the bridge, and with probably munition, and the Russians, as a result of strike, destroyed the bridge itself and the train on it, and that leads to the situation of complete collapse of the road, and the Ukrainians lost another logistic hub. Now they need to fix, now they need to repair the bridge, to remove the rail, the train, and obviously under such a heavy pressure of Russian FPV drones, Russian missiles, there is no need and sense of doing this. Now we are moving further to Kherson direction, more precisely to the Zaporozhye area, which is a part of Kherson direction according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. The Russians published additional videos of how they were bombing and attacking the military infrastructure, military factories and plants in Zaporozhye itself. On this video we can see the group of plants under the, let's say, control of Motor Sich company. The Russians, as you can see, were bombing this area heavily. A few fabs or maybe a few missiles arrived on the territory of the plant. Anyway, regarding the results the Russians managed to achieve as a result of those attacks, we see that the plant hasn't been damaged almost. Lots of completely normal buildings without visible, let's say, signs of that they are being damaged during the previous phase of the special military operation. Anyway, maybe the Russians managed to achieve some results, but anyway, we see that there are still lots of possibilities for the Ukrainians to continue production of whatever they were producing and creating on the territory. Very likely the Russians will continue bombing the territory of this plant. Now we're moving to Zaporozhye area itself. We have a certain Russian activity on the southern part, on the western part of Orekhov. FPV drones, artillery strikes. Very likely the Russians do have some plans, because usually the Russians start something unexpected, something with just few strikes and something like this, but later in a week or two or three, this situation ends with, let's say, additional captured territories by the Russian forces. So some certain activity in direction of Sherbaki. For now we don't have more details, let's wait. Robotyne itself, no changes on the ground. The clashes are taking place in the city, but very slow positional, let's say, battles without any progress on the ground. The main interest the Russians currently have to the northwest of Verbova. The Russians reached another defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians start bombing and attacking the Ukrainian territory here with cluster rounds. So this is like a part of the clearing operation. After the Russians finish the clearing operation with the use of RBK 500, FABs, artillery, flamethrower systems, they will start another offensive with the purpose to take under control additional tree lines and fields in the area, with the purpose to encircle Robotyne itself completely and the fields and the fortifications to the south. So we need to expect additional progress of the Russians. South Donetsk direction, Velika Novosilovka, Vremivka tactical bridgehead. After the Russians managed to achieve results on the southern outskirts of the village, they decided not to stop and they continue moving further. During the day we got reports that the Russians managed to cross Mokry Yaly River, and later we got additional updates from the tree line that was under very heavy fire of the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Russians were bombing this territory with flamethrower systems, which looks like artillery preparation before further movements along this tree line further to the north in direction of the farms. And this is very suitable and very, let's say, possible good stronghold for the Russians if they take control under this territory, because there are lots of farms, lots of barracks, lots of places that Russians can use for hiding equipment. So during the next few days we should expect additional progress of the Russian armed forces with the purpose to reach the central part of Urozhaine, and after that the Russians will be able to start the battle for Staromayorska from several directions as well. When talking about Staromayorska, the town, the village is under very heavy fire of the Russian forces with FABs. Also the Russians, as you can see, continue artillery preparation. Let's say also the Russians continue counter-artillery duels. So we see a certain preparation. We can't say that there are lots of forces neither from the Russian nor from the Ukrainian side. Few thousands from both sides, but we see that regarding the low level of forces, we see that the Russians control the initiative, and even having low level of forces, they can advance and they can continue continue moving, and this is exactly what the Russians are doing. We see a complete absence of any resistance from the Ukrainian side, so the question is, the Russians are asking themselves every day, why not to attack if there is no resistance from the Ukrainians? Ugledar, no changes, interesting updates, just few interesting updates we received from Novomikhailivka, Vadiana area. We got the video confirming the Ukrainians withdrawing their positions from the fields further to Vadiana. The Russians managed to discover the retreat Ukrainian forces, and they start bombing them with multiple launch rocket system. So very likely the Ukrainians probably abandon some trenches, and very likely the Russians will start offensive or will move further to the west along these, let's say, roads. We are not, let's say, considering the significant progress, but additional tree line obviously will be captured. Novomikhailivka, of course, another day, another battle for the village. Still, the Russians haven't made the final push. Obviously, the Ukrainians have no chances to hold the western part of the village, but for some reason the Russians are not pushing. Maybe the situation completely fit their requirements, completely fit their needs. The Ukrainians are suffering losses every day, so they are sending additional reinforcements to the area, and the reinforcements always stays in, let's say, in the western part. They don't have possibilities to run away, to evacuate, and this is maybe like something like a meat grinder that the Russians use in their favor. So we'll see what is going to be next week, this weekend, but for now the Russians are not moving further, just the clashes, let's say, on the border of the western part. Now we are moving to Krasnogorovka. The Russians, after they managed to dig in deeper in the southern and the southeastern part of the stronghold, probably currently trying to connect these two footholds by taking under control the Ukrainian trenches and fortifications in the area. Meanwhile, the Russian artillery forces and Russian aviation is pummeling and bombing the Ukrainian positions in the central part. The Russians' FPV drones flying above the area, trying to hunt the Ukrainian positions, Ukrainian FPV drone positions. So the clearing process, let's say 2 weeks ago, the main clearing process was taking place in the southern part and the southeastern part. But after the Russians captured the territory, we see that the clearing process with FPV drones moved further to the south central part and to the west central part of the, let's say, the stronghold. And furthermore, the Russians continue bombing the stronghold itself with ADAP bombs, 1,500, significant damage. We see also complete absence of any resistance from the Ukrainian side. Obviously, during the next few days, the Russians will try to improve their positions furthermore. And we have also FAPs every day. Lots of FAPs arrives in the area, so it's very difficult to understand what the Ukrainians are planning to do without any support from the Western countries. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and the most important ones is that the Russians start capturing, not capturing, that Ukrainian soldiers start surrendering in the area. More precisely, the forces of 25th Airborne Brigade surrendered to the Russian forces, so the process started once again. The last time we received significant number of prisoners of war took place in Avdiivka. Now the Ukrainians, after another defense belt collapse, start surrendering once again. So the Russians, according to some sources, managed to enter Umanska from the south, as we discussed in the previous updates, but yet we haven't received any confirmations of that. The Russians managed to establish control and to cut the main supply road between Yasnobrodovka and Itailovo as well, but once again no geolocations confirming this. So anyway, we see that there is a process, and the process takes time. Interesting details are coming from the northern part, from Berdychi. Today, after very heavy and bloody clashes for the village, we received the first geolocation confirming some Russian progress in the area. On this video, we can see the first probes, the first attempts from the Russian side to attack Berdychi from the north, but the Russian personnel carrier got on minefield, was damaged and probably destroyed or something like this. And this is the first attempt from the Russian side to attack Berdychi, let's say using this road to bypass the Durna River and then to move to the south. Somewhere in this area, the Russian armored vehicle was damaged and destroyed. Then infantry, when abandoned the tank or a personnel carrier, moved back to the tree lines and to the mainland. So as we can see, the main goal of the Russians is to establish control over these tree lines, and as soon as they do this, Berdychi will fall. So this is obviously going to happen very soon. Before moving further to Novokalina, I would like to discuss with you a few more interesting videos. the Russians published and presented us the first use of not like of a test equipment, but as I understand, this is already, let's say, production type, let's say production version of electronic warfare rifle. On the video, we might see the attempt from the Ukrainian side to attack the Russians. As you can see, there is a black dot. This is the Ukrainian FPV drone who was heading towards the Russian soldier, but the Russian soldiers targeted the FPV drone with its equipment, and basically the Ukrainian drone lost control, fell down, and was destroyed. And the most important, that was not the only video of this type. If you increase the numbers of updates, a few days ago the Russians published almost the same video of the use of the same equipment, but maybe on other direction. On this video we can see also the Ukrainian drone flying above some trenches, trying to hunt and to find the Russian soldiers. When the drone found the Russian soldier, the Ukrainians decided try to attack him, but the Russians captured the drone with the signal, and then the Russians basically thrown the drone out from the area. The important thing that if you can see the drone, it seems to me that it looks like when the drone was captured by FPV by this rifle, the Russians got possibility to start controlling the drone. So whatever where the Russian, let's say, move the rifle, the same way the drone flies. So something interesting. And of course, if the Russians are able to, let's say, to make the configuration of the weapon the way so the Russians can attack any type of FPV drones. Of course, this can be the, let's say, the breakable moment of the special military operation, because without FPV drones, there is no Ukrainian army at all, just a bunch of soldiers and nothing more. Interesting details are coming from Novokalinovo. The Russians continue offensive operation, and the sources continue reporting that they managed to establish control over the Stepova street and the buildings in the area, and according to different mappers, this approximately the territory under Russian control. So very big progress, as we can see. And furthermore, some Russian military experts like Rybar reported that the Russians managed to establish control also over the southern part of the area. So by Rybar, this is approximately the Russian progress on the southern part of Novokalinovo. Of course, significant results, as we can see, but the important thing that these results is more or less logical, because as we can see, there are trenches, but the main Ukrainian fortifications are located to the west of the Russian progress. So regarding the Russian attacks, the Russians haven't entered the areas of the main strongholds. This is the first stronghold area, this is the second one. On the northern part, the nearest stronghold is the area between Alexandropol and Arkhangelsk, this fortification. So for now, the Russians are moving along the fields, tree lines, trenches, tree lines, buildings, I don't know, farms and so on, without getting on the distance of the short rifle fire to the main Ukrainian fortifications, which also confirms that the main phase of the clashes on this direction hasn't been started yet. But anyway, the Russians, if they manage to half encircle Keramik in Novokalinovo, they will try to enter the village, and then probably they will start clashes for this stronghold, this one, and after the clashes for this stronghold, the Russians will start offensive operation towards Ocheretino to cut another, let's say, high-rise area at the final strategical point of the armed forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians will probably begin the battle for Selidova and Pokrovsk. Now we are moving further to Bakhmut-Artyomov's direction. The Russians also managed to reach the next defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine, but the Russians still haven't conducted the ground operation. Just take a look at this video. We can see the eastern part of Chasiv Yar. On this video, we can see significant, let's say, rich developed network of fortifications. Obviously, it's a suicide operation from the Russian side to storm these fortifications when there is a high-rise building area behind them. So for now, the only thing the Russians can do is to bomb and attack the Ukrainians, and very likely the Russians are waiting when the Ukrainians are going to start another rotation. Basically, during the previous days, the Russians managed to do the following thing. First of all, before the clashes for the eastern Chasiv Yar, the Ukrainians sent additional forces to the area, let's say fresh forces, fresh battalions. The, let's say, exhausted forces were redeployed, were removed from the eastern Chasiv Yar, and now the Russians need to wait when the next, let's say, rotation period starts, because after the Ukrainians finished the rotation, the Russians managed to establish complete fire control over the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and basically the Ukrainians in the area are cut off from the mainland. But they still have supplies, support, food, weapon, and so on. So they still have possibilities to hold the eastern Chasiv Yar. I can't tell you for sure how long they can do this, maybe a day, maybe two, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, but anyway, sooner or later they will be exhausted and completely empty, and after that they will be forced to start another rotation, and during this upcoming rotation, the Russians will start the ground operation. But before that, the Russians still have a lot of things to do. They continue the preparing of the foothold and future offensive roads before using of them. For example, to the west-north of Ivanovsk, the Russians were bombing the territory heavily with the TOS flamethrower systems. Let's say this is another act of preparation before further offensive, but without any operations on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to discover and to destroy significant number of, let's say, radars, equipment, communication equipment in the central part of Chasiv Yar, which was later destroyed by the Russian anti-tank missiles. Then we got updates about how the Russians were bombing the eastern Chasiv Yar, so everything is on schedule. We shouldn't expect the Russian offensive, let's say, today or tomorrow. There are still a lot of things to do, but when the time comes, the Russians will do this, and the Ukrainians obviously will be forced to fall back. Bogdanovka, interesting reports. The Russians reported that, the sources reported that the Russians established complete control over the village. The Ukrainians confirmed that the village was completely captured by the Russians. As we can see, we have some updates, some, territory colored area, so once again, for now, no geolocations, no videos, but the Ukrainians reported that the village was captured completely. We need a little bit more to wait. Maybe tomorrow the Ministry of Defense will provide us additional information. If the information confirmed, we will change the color before the next update. Anyway, we got that Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours tried to counterattack the Russians, but even on this video we can see another Ukrainian personnel carrier heading towards the Russian positions, and the Ukrainians got on the mines, probably mines that were already established by the Russians, and the armored vehicle was damaged and probably destroyed. So if Bogdanovka falls, if Bogdanovka have already fallen, then of course it's going to be much more easier for the Russians to begin the final on the most important, the main part of the battle for the eastern Chasiv Yar. The Russians increased their activity on Siversk direction after just a few days of pause on Razdolovka. The Russians renewed their FPV droning in the area. A significant number of FPV drone strikes, FPV drone bombings of Ukrainian soldiers. Obviously, very likely, soon we're going to see another attempt of attack from the Russian side. The railways between Bilogorovka and Vyimka, the Russians continue clearing operation on the territory. They published significant number of artillery strikes. And based on the geolocations, we can see that the Russians are about to start another offensive. They're about to finish the preparation. Probably in a day or in a two, they will make another attempt with the purpose to establish additional control. But from the other side, we see that, from Berestova to this line, there were just, 3 lines, not so many fortifications. And now, basically, the Russians managed to reach the main defense belt of the Ukrainians on this direction. So it's going to take more time for them to clear this territory. But maybe they have already finished this process. And now they will start offensive with the purpose to establish control over strategical, heights and over strategical strongholds. We haven't received anything from Verkhnykamensk, whether the Russians managed to improve their positions or not, but for now we will keep the area as is. We got some activity of the armed forces of Russian Federation in the vicinity of Sporne. The Russians start bombing and attacking the Ukrainian fortifications to the northwest of the village. The area is under very heavy fire. Very likely we should expect some offensive from the Russian side in the very near future. Bilogorovka, no changes on the ground, just more Russian FPV, drone strikes in the southern part. If we increase the numbers of updates, we're going to see the real picture of the situation on the southern part of Bilogorovka. Every single square meter here was entrenched by the Ukrainians, so that's why there are a lot of job to do. But as soon as the Russians clear the southern part, probably only then we can start talking about the finish, about the ending of the battle for Bilogorovka. South in Kupiansk direction, we haven't received anything, just the regular similar situation. Very likely the Ukrainians understand that they don't have possibilities to counterattack the Russians very deep inside of the Russian controlled territory, so that's why the Ukrainians decided to stop. They don't have forces for counterattacks, and for now the Russians also haven't conducted any attempts to attack the Ukrainians. So the situation was stabilized, but along Zheribets River on the Russian side. But anyway, if you take a look at the map, you're going to see that the main Ukrainian defense belt is located to the west of the Zheribets River. Significant number of trenches and fortifications, and on the Russian side there are almost nothing. So that's why the Ukrainians will not lose anything if they surrender, if they, let's say, withdraw their positions, because it's just like the preparation before the main battle on this side of the river. North in Kupiansk direction, we haven't received anything. Furthermore, the Russians during the previous 24 hours conducted a significant number of strikes on Ukrainian positions in Mirgorod and Selidova. A few more temporary positions were discovered by the Russians, and as a result of Tornado S or Iskander strikes, those ammo depots and concentration of forces were destroyed. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.